Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to everyone to this third session on Foundations of Islamic Economics. As I have been doing in the last class, I will begin just a couple of minutes just to give a short recap of what we covered in the previous sessions. If you remember, our purpose in this 6 or 7 weeks will be to talk about three interrelated questions. The first question is, why Islamic economics? The second question is, what is Islamic economics? And the third question will be, how do we develop Islamic economics? Right? So the last 2 weeks we have been talking about the first question, and that is, why Islamic economics? Some of the points that we tried to present is that, firstly, disciplines that we teach in universities, they are not value-free, especially in the social sciences. The various disciplines that we are having, faculties of economics, sociology, departments of sociology, psychology, they're all coming from a certain Western European experience, especially over the last 300 years. What makes this 300 years in Western Europe very significant is because this period also coincided with what scholars call the secularization era of Western Europe. And therefore, the disciplines that we have that came from this period also present a secular worldview, a worldview that depicts the secularization process, and the ideology that is underpinning it is the ideology of secularism, right? What we tried to also say, why we need Islamic economics, because the worldview that is at the foundation of Islamic economics is different from that of the modern economic worldview, right? And therefore, if we are talking about Islamic economics must be able to approach, understand the problems that we are facing, and we must try to make solutions and resolutions for these problems, not only of Muslims, but for all humanity, and to be able to do it from an Islamic perspective, right? So in very brief, this is what we tried to discuss in the first 2 weeks. And we have given some aspects of the worldview in order to show that the Islamic worldview economic worldview is different than the modern economic worldview, right? So with that in mind, what I want to do today and also next week is to talk about the second question. What is Islam? What is Islamic economics? But in order for us to answer this question, we have to, maybe today's class, we will talk a little bit about the connection of Islam to economics, because we are using this term Islamic economics. We are putting the adjective Islamic in front of economics. So what is Islam? What is economics? Now, from discussion of worldview, we mentioned that in Islam, we understand Islam to be deen, yes? And deen, of course, is not having the same meaning as religion. Deen gives the view that it is a complete way of life, yeah? And I'm referring specifically to the writings of Prof. Alatas, yeah, on trying to derive the significance of this term deen. So it is a complete way of life, and we also quoted Montgomery Watt, a Western scholar, who also, in his study of Islam and the concept of deen, comes to the same conclusion. Deen implies a complete way of life. That means the religion has guidelines for all aspects of life, including economics, right? Now, when we talk about economics, then economics is a discipline on the one hand, we study economics, but we also do economics. Yeah, it is also an activity, right? So when we make decisions on what to buy, on what to produce, yeah, all of this comes under the activities related to economics. And therefore, economics tries to understand how human beings make those decisions in that area of life, yeah? Consumption, production, distribution. And economics, as we will do, maybe not in this class, but in next week's class, it has a scope and a definition. In fact, they have many definitions over the last 300 years. Many scholars have tried to give definition. But the important point that we need to keep in mind is there is a certain subject matter that we all, if you see the table of content, you know that this is economics, and you will not confuse it with other subjects, yeah, other disciplines. So Islam then must be able to guide this economic decision making, right? So there is an inherent connection between Islam and economics, and this is what we will call Islamic economics, right? Now, before we talk about Islamic economics, I also just want to spend a little bit of time giving a very short history of modern economics. Now, we are only exposed to the economics that we study in our textbooks today, right? And you know, the textbooks today are very different than the textbooks 40 years ago when I was first studying economics. The textbooks that I used to use, we used to teach, you know, the chapters, the contents were quite different than what is being taught today. So economics is an evolving discipline, right? But when you want to talk about the history of modern economics, we have to understand that modern economics is actually a very relatively young discipline, right? Originally, and if we go back to the time of Adam Smith, Adam Smith was not an economist. He was a moral philosopher. Yeah? So philosophy was the big mother discipline, and there were different dimensions or aspects of philosophy. One of those areas in philosophy was called moral philosophy. So what we discuss in moral philosophy became, as it evolved, slowly it became more specialized, and those people who were talking about this called it political economy, right? And the name economics only came about at the end of the 19th century with the publication of Alfred Marshall's Principles of Economics in 1890. So it is only 130 years old, if you just want to talk about the term economics, right? But what is significant is when Alfred Marshall wrote his Principles of Economics, the bigger intellectual, you can say the intellectual agenda that occurred in the period between 1850 to 1880, yeah, this 30 years, very important era. This is the time in Western Europe, especially in England, because England was actually one of the main centers of development of economics. Yeah, many of the very famous economists and political economists were based in Britain, in England. And so you find that this period in England was the period in which the scholars who were developing this political economy at that time, they were slowly and slowly, they were separating the discipline from the discussion of religion. If you look at the writings, maybe not Adam Smith may not be the best example, but certainly there were many other scholars at the same time of Adam Smith, and maybe even after Adam Smith. When they tried to explain political economy, they always tried to connect it to theology, all right? So whatever we were doing in political economy was also, the attempt was to still connect it to religion, to theology, right? But in that period of 1850 to 1880, 1890, according to the historians of ideas, they say that this was the period in which the sciences triumphed over religion. And the writings in political economy, and later on to become economics, no longer needed to connect itself to theology or to religion. It became, in a way, a separate area of study. Right now, why am I spending such a long time talking about this? I want to stress the fact that although economics came as part of moral philosophy, but because of the Western European experience, and that period of 30, 40 years in the 19th century, economics separated itself. And that is why we have later on in the 20th century, this distinction between normative and positive. And they always tell us we are focusing on positive economics, all right? So this very important, fact, historical fact, it's very important because in a way, what we are trying to do in Islamic economics is actually, we are trying to take economics back to its origin, right? What we have in the last 100 years actually is a departure from what economics is supposed to be. It is supposed to be part of moral philosophy. Yeah, it was having this ethical construct. Now, don't take my word for it. For example, if you read one of the most famous scholars to talk about ethics and economics, Amartya Sen. He won the economics prize in 1998. Very famous for his book on ethics and economics, right? Now, what did he say? Now, he said that the economics that we have today, actually, if you go back to history, there are two important components that combine together. One is ethics, the other one is engineering. I think what he means by engineering is the quantitative side, the scientific side, yeah, and then you have ethics. So Amartya Sen is saying that what has happened in our own discipline is, over the decades and centuries, it is the engineering side that has become very prominent, and in a way, the ethical side has been marginalized. All right. So what we are trying to do in Islamic economics, we are trying to bring back ethics into economics. And Islamic economists are not the only ones. There are also many other scholars who feel that we should bring ethics back into economics. Now, if we say that Islamic economics is an ethics-based economics, then the question is, then why don't we just follow the discussions of ethical-based economics? And there are so many writings on this, right? Now, this is very important because the ethics that we are talking about, all right, in Islamic economics cannot just be any ethical economics. Our economics is an ethics-based economics, but it must be a religion-based ethical economics. And I'm taking this from the writings of Amartya Sen, who also, if those of you who are, sorry, not Amartya Sen, from the writings of Said Nawab Haider Naqvi. He wrote a very important book in 1981, and I think he is commenting on the work of Amartya Sen. And so his book was also called Ethics and Economics, but he had a subtitle, An Islamic Synthesis. All right. So in that book, Naqvi argues that Islamic economics is an ethical or ethics-based economics, but it must be a religion-based ethical economics. So the ethical foundation comes from the religion of Islam, right? Not from other sources, because you can also have a very humanist source of ethics, yeah, which you know, you will find that there are many similarities, but in our case, we get our ethical what do you call it, teachings from the religion of Islam. Right? So keep that in mind. Right? Very important. We are trying to bring back ethics into economics. We share a lot of common ground with others who are talking about ethics and economics. But in our case, our ethics has to be grounded in the religion of Islam. Now you may ask, what about those who talk about other religions? Christian economics or Catholic economics, Buddhist economics, etc. Yes, we may be able to work together on certain areas, but we must always keep in mind, whatever we present as Islamic economics ultimately must go back to our sources of knowledge. That is Quran, the Sunnah, you know, the scholars' opinions, our use of reason, observation. These are all our sources of knowledge. All right. So this is important point. Now, we also talked about it in session 1. We said that because the world views are different, underlying modern economics as well as Islamic economics, that the assumptions that we make, the source of ethics, and the ethical, the detailed meaning of certain ethical principles may mean very different from what Islam means. Yeah? Let me give an example. There is no economic system, whether it is capitalism or socialism, that will not say they want to have economic justice. All systems will say we promote economic justice. But what you mean by economic justice will differ. Yeah? So in the capitalist economy, economic justice most of the time is not given a great amount of prominence. Distributive justice is an outcome of markets. So the idea of intervening, the idea in redistribution is not something that is very popular, although they do have taxation. But if you go to a socialist system, the idea of economic justice is very different, right? So similarly, when we want to talk about economic justice in Islam, we have to go back to our sources of knowledge, right? So this, I think, is a standard point. Everybody agrees. I want to maybe just, not to say end, but in a few minutes' time, I will be stopping. I want to have more time for questions today. I want to share with you, if I can, this very famous quotation. I think everybody has. Let me share with you here. Yeah? This is the one here. Okay. Can everybody see the screen? I hope so. Yeah. Okay. So there is a very famous quotation from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which everybody quotes. All right. I'm sure you have seen this quotation. If you are an economy student and you haven't seen this quotation, then we have to worry. Yeah. Wealth of Nations. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. we addressed ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love. Okay, this quotation is the quotation quoted so many times to say that self-interest or self-love, the word here used is self-love, but also explained as self-interest. Self-interest is the most important dynamic of economics, or at least the economics of Adam Smith, and of course the classical economists and the current economics that we teach. Yeah? So when the businessman, whether he is the butcher or the brewer or the baker, he is not thinking about other people. He is thinking about them, his own self-interest, right? So we do not expect, we expect our dinner not because they are benevolent. Yeah, benevolence, that means ihsan. They're thinking about other people. No, but because he is thinking about his own interests. What is meant by this? It means that if I'm a businessman, if I want to be successful, I shouldn't be thinking about other people's interests. I have to think about my interest. Okay? If I want to do well in business, I must make sure customer comes to me. And therefore, I shouldn't cheat. I shouldn't, have a product that is not good quality. I should give my best. And I'm doing it not because I'm thinking about the customer, but I'm thinking about my own interest. If I don't give good products, if I don't give a good price, if I don't give good service, people won't come to me. And because of that, I supply the meat, I supply the drinks, I supply the bread, I supply all the other products and services, right? So this is very fundamental, right? And people quote this paragraph, and because of this, they say capitalist economics, the neoclassical economics that we teach is all based on self-interest. Only your own interest, right? Now, I don't want to get into the philosophical discussion. There are some people who say there are different degrees of self-interest. You have at the very bottom, you have something called selfishness. And then you have self-interest. And then you have enlightened self-interest. And then you have altruism. Altruism is you're thinking about other people, right? But Adam Smith focused on self-interest. He did not say selfishness. Yeah? So he made a distinction. Unfortunately, today in modern economics, there is no distinction made between selfish and self-interest. And this is a big mistake, I think, in economics, what to do. Now, I'm quoting this quotation because I want you all to compare if we just modified this statement by adding 2 words into this paragraph, it changes the entire meaning of Adam Smith, all right? Look at this. This is the modified. I'm taking this from a work written in maybe the late 70s, in humanistic economics, all right? People who are very concerned about ethics, but not necessarily religious-based ethics, but ethical economics. This is what they said. If we just modify that paragraph by adding 2 words, okay? Look at the statement now. The original statement was in black, and now they say add these 2 words. So now the paragraph reads, it is not only from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but also from their regard to their own interest. Okay? We address ourselves not, and then we can actually add another only there. We address ourselves not only to their humanity, but also to their self-love. Now, this means what? This paragraph means human beings, actually the nature of human beings is they also think about others. It is not impossible for the human being to think about other people. all right? But what do we teach in economics? Yeah, in economics, we teach that in order to be a good businessman, you have to only think about your self-interest. If you don't, you are irrational, right? You are irrational. So economic models, the theories that we teach, tell us that in order to be a good businessman, you need to be thinking only of yourself, right? But in the context of how Adam Smith said, should be like that. That means I don't cheat, I don't think of the other person, but I provide my best product, my best service so that people come to me and I am successful. They also get good products. Now, if everybody does this in society, then society benefits. This is the ideal Adam Smith, all right? Unfortunately, what has happened because the kind of economics that we have is not based on this passage, on the new one with the red letters, but it is based on the old one, right? It is without the red letters. In other words, benevolence is not in the picture. It is only self-interest. Okay? So if we want to bring ethics back into economics, right, we just have to keep in mind that the nature of human beings is actually, the fitrah of human beings is to actually not only think of themselves, but they also have capacity to think about other people. All right. So I want to stop at this point. The main lesson today is when we talk about Islamic economics, and we will discuss in detail the definitions and so on in the next session. When we want to talk about Islamic economics, we want to say that we are bringing economics back to its original position, where ethics was a component, an important component of economics. All right. The only main, and of course, it's not the only difference, but the main difference is our source of ethics is the religion of Islam. And therefore, when we want to talk about Islamic economics and what it is an economics that is guided by the ethical and legal values and norms and principles that you find in the religion of Islam. All right, so let me stop at this point. I would like to maybe accept your own comments or maybe some questions. We give a little bit more time today than I think in the previous class. And hopefully maybe there's also some chats. I don't have to spend time answering the questions later, but if there are some, maybe I can actually look into the chat and see. Yeah, so for now, I stop at this point and I look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions that you want to.
Okay, Prof. While Prof then searching the chat, we invite Brother Tijani Muhammad. Brother Tijani, are you there? Okay. I will unmute Brother Nasir.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wait, who's this?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Brother Nasir or Brother Tijani?
Yeah, Nasir.
Oh, Nasir first. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation. Now, I just want to ask the lecturer that, is there any correlation as far as, like now I have a background of economics. We were taught econometrics and some part of what do we call a public sector economy, petroleum economy. I want to ask if there's any relationship with this Islamic economics. It's an economics that is guided by the ethical rules, norms of Islam, like we just said now. So I just want to know, if we are to go deeper into this course, are we going to be looking into the areas of those petroleum economics, econometrics, and a few others? That's my question. Jazakumullah wa anni kulla salihah.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Nasir. You know, there is another a very prominent contemporary Islamic economist. His name is Prof. Asad Zaman, based in Pakistan. I would advise you can go to his blog. Just Google him, Asad Zaman, ASAD Zaman. He has numerous literature written, and there is even topics on statistics for Islamic economics. Yeah? He argues that there are certain ways for you to present even numbers, okay, from an Islamic perspective. This is his view, and he has classes he gives. You can go to. It's a very, I think it would be very beneficial if you looked at it. Whether or not Islamic economics will have opinion on all of these smaller areas, the sub areas of economics, like you mentioned petroleum economics, right? Now, instead of only talking about petroleum, we could widen the area to talk about mineral economics or resource economics, right? Now, how will Islamic view guide the discussion of resource economics? We have to go back to our sources of knowledge and try to derive from those sources of knowledge what are the principles and the norms and the values that are going to guide us when we deal with the resources that have been created by Allah for us. So if there are countries that have been blessed by oil, okay, now how are they supposed to treat this, right? I mean, it will even start from the most basic position, the ownership of those resources. Can it be privately owned? Now, it's very interesting. If you look at all Muslim countries, right, because of the tradition of Islam in those countries, I don't know of any Muslim country or the writings in that country, the writings of the fuqaha, who have said that it is possible for private owner to own the oil field. It must be public property, right? And this is based on either verses of Quran or Hadith, yeah, in which these are public property, cannot be privately owned. But you just compare with other countries in the West, for example, in America. It's very possible for people to privately own oil, land that has oil. In fact, they can even privately own the oil companies. President of America, George Bush, came from an oil-rich family, right? And we got so many other examples of private owners of the oil field. But in Islam and in Muslim countries, basic rule is public property, right? And what is the difference? Well, this is a different, maybe if you come for the full FIE course, we can go into it. But there is a big difference on how you're supposed to use public property and how you're supposed to use private property. Yeah. So how will Islam look at all these different smaller areas? Go back to our sources of knowledge, extract the rules that will guide our area that we want to talk about.
Tijani, can you try again?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much, Prof, for this wonderful presentation. My question goes like this, Prof. Last time, I think in our first class, you have talked about the issue of replication of product for Islamic banking system, for instance. Nowadays, if we look at it, even through research, for instance, those of us who are in the academic line wanted to make a research based on Islamic economics and Islamic banking and finance, we find it difficult at times to find a material.
losing his
lost him.
Okay.
Okay, maybe he will come back later, I suppose.
Well, can you take question from Sister Hawa Bibi Khan from the chat?
Okay, I'm trying to go. Okay, yes, this is a question here on why hasn't Muslims and Muslim countries practiced Islamic economics? Is that the question?
Yeah.
And why hasn't it been in the mainstream of these societies? Why is our focus on Western economics and approach of catch up as opposed to discuss where Islamic economics is the center? This is the lesson in humanity, right? I think Ibn Khaldun talked about this in his Muqaddimah, that whenever civilizations meet and different forces meet, the ones who are in a weaker position, and if they lose in the battle, they become the followers of those who win. And this is the condition of the Muslim countries over the last, the time that we were talking about in Europe, the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. This was the time when European powers were ruling the world. I mean, you just imagine Britain, a small island, and it's physically small, a population of maybe, now it's a population maybe of about 70 million. And yet at one time, the British Empire ruled, half the world. I mean, how was it possible, right? So Muslims, unfortunately, lost their ability to understand their own religion. And there are many scholars who have given their analysis as to why this happened. Professor Alatas, of course, is very famous. He talks about the corruption of knowledge, the loss of adab, yeah? and therefore Muslims lost their worldview. Yeah? Muslims lost their ability to understand their religion, to understand their worldview, and therefore they got stuck in the old. They did not move with the times, all right? Whereas in the West, they took from the Muslim world, and then they managed to add on according to their own worldview, and they have had tremendous material success. So today it is very common that Muslim countries that got independence maybe 60, 70 years ago, after World War II, they are only now starting to govern themselves, right? And even this, of course, we all know that when the Muslim countries got independence, initially they just continued to follow their old colonial master system. So if you were colonized by the British, then you would have a very British system in your country. If you were colonized by the French, you would have a very French type of system. It is only in the late 60s and maybe in the 70s that Islamic resurgence started to happen again, right? And so we are only about 40, 50 years old, and therefore I think we shouldn't worry too much about the time. Yeah? It is a very short time in history. If you look at the history of disciplines, Islamic economics is about maybe 40 years plus now. It's a very short time. 40 years, of course, for a human being may be long. You are already maybe halfway through your life, if not more than half. But 40 years in the area of intellectual history is very short, right? So we have to do whatever we can do and hope that the next generation will be better than our generation. Wallahu a'lam.
In our English literature class, we learned in 1922, UK has 420 million population. 420 million. Those days, when they are in power.
You mean all over the world? That means they are in, yeah, all over the world. Yes, of course. Yeah. But I'm just trying to think how people from a small island became so powerful. I mean, if you think about it, it is incredible, right? I mean,
Okay.
today people talk about America. You know, America, relatively big, big country, and 300 plus million. But Britain, small, such a small country, and yet it was able to have the British Empire, right? Although now, I mean, even Britain is already maybe old country, right? We need to go and find the new one. Maybe Muslim countries will, this is the time for the Muslim countries to come back, inshallah. There is a question from Nuruddin. Do Protestant ethics have in common with Islamic ethics, common as well as differences? Can you explain more about the superiority of Islamic ethics over other economics ethics or religious values or secular ethics? Now, I just want to say this. Of course, if we are Muslims, we must believe that Islam is the best, right? That our values, because these are coming from Allah, revealed in His final revelation, we believe that Islam is the best. But the values that you find in the Quran, the principles, the norms, the Sharia that you find must be practiced, must be interpreted, and must be practiced. And therefore, we are in a very, very awkward position as Muslims. We claim to have the absolute word of God in the form of Quran. We claim to have absolute truth. And of course, we all believe this, right? But yet, when you look at the understanding and the interpretation and application of this in our daily lives, unfortunately, Muslim countries are not the best examples in many areas, right? Even in areas where we are supposed to be strong. This is why Dr. Hamid Abu Sulaiman, when he talked about crisis in the Muslim mind, he talked about the problems with the Muslims are not only their inability to think as they should, right? And then later on he said, crisis of the will. Yeah, we don't have the ability to do things correctly, right? So we have major challenge in the Muslim world. We can feel proud that we have the absolute word of God. We have, the best ethical system in theory. But I think when it comes to converting it into practice, this is where our challenge is, right? And that is why we have to be able to understand our sources of knowledge. We must be able to think correctly. Yeah? We must use our akal in the correct way. And we must be able to show that it is true, Islam is the best. Right? At the moment, this is not the case. And this is why I think there is a very famous saying, I can't remember the full thing, but action speaks louder than words, right? So you can talk so much about Islamic economics. At the end of the day, people want to see what is the condition of the economies of Muslim countries. And if the condition of Muslim countries are not, doing very well, how can you talk about Islamic economics, right? Of course, we can always tell them that, well, none of these Muslim countries are practicing Islamic economics, right? And that is why they are doing badly. But we have to be ready. If they decide to take Islamic economics, what do we do, right? I don't think we are necessarily ready for that. So as far as academics are concerned, we have to provide the academic content and therefore build our discipline of economics so that it can actually go into practice.
Yeah, bro, we have this brother Ryan Tori. Can you? Is
it Wulandri?
Oh, I have my R-Y-A-N-T-O-R-I. Is it you, brother?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Speaking. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Can you speak louder, brother? Can hear you.
Thank you, Sheikh Shahran, for the opportunity. My academic interest is about Islam, economical politics, and international relation, Prof.
Yeah, yes.
I don't know whether my question is suitable for this lecture, for this evening lecture, but I would like you to comment about my hypothesis. I have a hypothesis that say the more strong the currency of state, so the more economics the state have. So my question is, what do you think about the relation between the currency, strong currency, and the strong economics? That's the first question. And the second question I would like to ask is about, can you give me or can you tell me about a good book that telling about Islamic currency? That's all. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much. Well, I'm not very sure whether a strong currency is necessarily the only way for the country to be stronger. I think rather than say a stronger currency, I think it must be the correct value. Okay, and I'm talking about the current system where we are using fiat money and our exchange rate is determined based on the supply and demand of our currencies. Yeah. So in this current system, we need to find the rate which is the best for our country. Sometimes if you have a very strong currency, it may actually be not good for you, right? For example, if you are an exporting country and you have a very strong currency and you want to export your goods, then your goods become more expensive to other people. You cannot sell, right? And that is why there are historical examples where the country purposely makes their currency fall, yeah, depreciate their currency or devalue their currency so that they can sell their products more. So, of course, I think I would say we need to have a correct value, right? Now, of course, there are lots of people who will talk about the gold dinar and so on, and maybe somebody else may need to speak about this topic. To me, you know, many years ago, I did a paper with one of our PhD students because at that time there was a lot of interest in the area of gold and silver, right? Dinar and dirham. And there was a view, and I even in the beginning, I actually also thought that you know, gold and silver had some kind of special place. But when I looked at and this is done by this PhD student, when we looked at the views of the fuqaha, right from the time of Imam Abu Hanifa and his students, throughout the ages until today, we find that there are actually different opinions on what should be money. Right? So what we did in that paper, we basically argued, and from the writings of the fuqaha, that money does not only have to be gold and silver. So the title of my paper, the paper was, Must money be limited to gold and silver? And our finding was no. Right? So I welcome those who want to work on gold and silver or any other alternative currency. There are so many writings, not only among Muslims, but even in conventional writings. People talk about all kinds of items. And today, of course, we're talking about you know, Bitcoins and all these other things. So to me, as far as the views of the fuqaha are concerned, you don't need to have only gold and silver. I mean, if that is what you were referring to, but I'm not sure. So my point is, what is the best currency? To me, it can be variety of things. Commodity-based currencies, the backing must be there. Backed by what? Should it be backed by gold? So some people say we must actually use gold and silver. Others say we don't need to use, just back it by gold. Others will say you can back it by commodities. Doesn't have to be only gold, right? And then of course you got your fiat system where it is not backed by anything. It is just demand supply, which is probably a little bit questionable in terms of its value. But at the end of the day, whatever you are using, you have to manage the system well. It doesn't mean just because you use gold and silver and you manage it badly, the system is going to work, right? During the time of this scholar who wrote, a very famous scholar who wrote about money, he was talking about crisis at that time when gold and silver was used, right? Because of the what do you call it, widespread use of fulus, right? Created problem. So in other words, the system was badly managed. So badly managed system, no matter what you have, can be a problem. So we also have to manage it well. Yeah, Wallahu a'lam.
Prof, we give you a longer time to conclude, Prof. Another 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay, well, let me just, I like maybe some of these questions because
Okay, choose, yeah.
There is a question on Protestant ethics. I've already done this. Okay, so why is this not going down? Sorry, waiting for the answer on when question. I'm not sure what is this when question.
Okay, the next subject. So when is the next next class?
When? Well, it's not when. It's going to be still what next week, and then followed by how.
How.
From Moyosore Muhammad, with regard to the present challenge, what do you think should come first into implementing this approach? I'm not too sure what you mean, but certainly you have to have the knowledge base, right? There is, you know, to practice without the knowledge base, I think is going to be very problematic. So we have to build the knowledge base so that what we practice, you know, is actually something which makes, you know, which makes sense. Especially if we want to claim that it is the Islamic position. Have we undertaken a study, again from Hawa Bibi Khan? Have we undertaken a study to understand how Muslim multinationals, Muslim business people and Muslim entrepreneurs have been applying Islamic economic principles and ethics? How is their behavior different from the behavior and values of their Western and other counterparts? Please do a lot of these studies, because I believe this is one of the problems, right? When we argue in class about maximization of profit, and we argue in Islamic economics, some people say it is okay to maximize. Other people say it's not necessary to maximize. But this is all in theory. We need to have proper empirical work also to see how Muslim businesses actually practice their business. Are they knowledgeable, or do they have any idea of you know, maximization principle, or do they do it in a different way? All right. We may, this is my own personal view, that really in economics, our teaching of economics, especially in the case of theory of the firm, is a very outdated approach. We teach as if the company is an owner-managed company. In today's world, owner-managed company is not there. All our models that we have, that we teach in when we discuss market, is all talking about owner-managed companies. Today, you talk about multinational companies, you talk about all kinds of things. I think economics, we have to maybe update our, you know, our way of teaching in these classes. And sometimes that is the reason why some people like to go into business studies, because business studies do much more real world decision making. We are still very abstract, you know? And of course there's nothing wrong being abstract, but we have to inform our theory also with some of the realities that we face in our own societies, right? So we don't take the realities of Western societies, we have to take the realities of Muslim societies and bring it into our teaching of economics. So these are important studies. I wish you will actually do these studies.
Prof, the rest can answer on in writing, Prof. It's almost 10 o'clock.
All right, inshallah. Maybe just the last question here. Somebody, Tijani is asking, maybe this is the one that you could not finish just now. In our last class, you talk about the replication of products. But my question is why the research on Islamic economic system is so limited and most of them too are not in-depth as conventional. Please advise how to get topic for Islamic economics. We will be glad to assist to come and do PhD. You know, this is unfortunately the reality. In the last 15 years, there has been more work in the area of banking finance. I think I talked about this right in the first class. Not much sufficient interest in economics. And secondly, when you talk about economics, also not enough interest in the foundations of economics. Yeah? Very few people are doing PhDs in the area of methodology or doing in the area of philosophy. Everybody wants to do something in the empirical work as well in the banking sector. I believe there has to be dedicated funds coming from very many different sources in order to get funds to be used by PhD students in the areas that we think are important, but no interest. So how do you get interest? Give a scholarship to students to do his PhD in that area. So we may get some students who are interested to do in this area. So we build up the base. Yeah? And certainly if you look at the quality of much of our PhD thesis, even in Islamic economics or written from Islamic perspective, they are mainly just doing empirical work, let's say on the Islamic banking in a particular country, measuring it using the existing tools that you find in conventional economics. And then we say Islamic banks are, are efficient or not as efficient. Islamic banks are very, growth rate so much. They don't really make a big significant change. And I think this is what I would advise everybody. If the YouTube is still available on the 12th conference, please use your time to go and look and listen to some of the keynote addresses that were presented by Mehmet from Durham, Prof. Ma'bid from Ankara University. They had very solid, important things to say in the keynote. Yeah? So if you can get access to the YouTube 12th IIIF that was held in Istanbul and just finished yesterday, please, listen to their comments about the importance of research in Islamic economics. Wallahu a'lam.
Prof, thank you so much. Any last word, Prof, or that's all?
Well, I think just to mention that today I have just tried to, to give one important point, and that is Islamic economics has to be a religious-based ethical economics, governed by the values, the norms, the principles, the laws that you find in the sources of knowledge. So in the next session next week, inshallah, we will look at some definitions that have been given and then try to see how we go about talking about the subject matter of Islamic economics.
Thank you so much, Prof. See you again next week, same time,
right.
inshallah.
Thank you very much.
And the brothers, see you tomorrow for another class.
Right.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.